Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye is at the Medford Public Library, interviewing candidates in the 2014 elections. We're interviewing Mr. Paul Demain of Hayward. He's a Democrat running in the 29th Senate District. Paul, welcome to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you much.
Programming note, Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Paul, give us the short version of your bio. You started a company. Well, go ahead, talk about that, please.
Well, yeah, I did start a company. It was after I left the Tony Earl administration in the governor's office in 1987 after serving 4 years there. But I was born in Milwaukee, St. Joseph's Hospital, grew up in Wausau my entire life, graduated from Wausau West High School, went to the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, got a degree there in mass communications, and then moved to Sawyer County, where I've resided for the rest of my life for almost 36 years now. My oldest son is 35 years old. I have 7 children, 14 grandchildren, and other than the 4 years that I spent in Madison, have spent it in northern Wisconsin and inside the current 29th Senate District.
Well, what do you see as the top issue? Or let me ask it this way. Is there one issue or one set of issues that made you decide to run for the Senate, sir?
Well, I was certainly concerned about the divisiveness that's taken place under this current administration. I was very perturbed by that in a lot of ways, in terms of some of the legislation that came through with what I call the 50% plus one vote syndrome, in which I think total numbers of people, half of the people that should have been at the table, were disallowed from being there in the conversation. I think it led to a very divisive agenda. That was the main concern that brought me to the table of examining whether I should run for office. As I got out there and asked questions, there's people that says, look, we're disappointed in the current legislators because we thought my opponent was at one point known as a moderate. I think they're concerned about the fact that he simply toed the party line on some of the recent pieces of legislation that weren't beneficial to the 29th district, and they're concerned about that.
Well, you mentioned on your website a top issue is rural schools and the issue of our K-12 schools, which in the next budget there's going to be major issues in terms of whether we need a new school aid formula, how should rural schools be helped, the choice and voucher programs. Can you give me your thoughts on the next budget and what it needs to do for K-12?
The next budget is going to be a struggle because it looks like we're churning up a $1.5 billion deficit that's going to be a concern for everyone. It's going to mean that we're going to have difficult decisions to make. We know that in northern Wisconsin, I don't think we can consolidate the schools much more without losing some of our major school districts and having students traveling 40 or 50 miles to go to their public schools. But these massive budget cuts that have occurred to the public school system, in which $1,000 per student less is going in state aids to our districts, I think was the wrong decision. I find that the public schools, I think we need to invest in them. I think it helps grow a good middle class. It gives people an opportunity for career choices. I think it takes people out of poverty, and I think it needs to be the priority in terms of our investment in the future. K through 12, our technical institutes and our colleges need to be affordable for Wisconsin citizens to go to and get a good education.
One of the major issues is in the next session will be whether to expand further the school choice and voucher program. Your position on those?
I don't agree with for-profit private school vouchers. I think we can do a lot better in terms of supporting public school charter tracks of education in northern Wisconsin that are accountable to the local school boards. I don't believe that we ought to be using taxpayers' money to fund private schools, for-profit schools, any more than me or you have a right to have our own fire truck at the end of the neighborhood because we don't simply like the current system that's working. So I'm very reluctant to see any expansion. In fact, in northern Wisconsin, there's very little choice to have a private education. Anyway, those institutions don't exist, and I think we ought to focus on Kenosha and Milwaukee, where those vouchers started. Perhaps those private school vouchers are justified in those districts, but we don't need any further expansion, and we don't certainly need the exemptions that came along with it, in which people like our congressman can take up to $10,000 per child deduction off his state taxes when he can afford to send his kids to private schools without those exemptions. It's part of the reason we're creating this deficit at the state budget level, is because of those kinds of exemptions that have been carved out for people who can afford it and companies who can afford to pay taxes much better than what the common citizen can nowadays.
Governor Walker over the summer asked that the Senate and the Assembly withdraw Wisconsin from the Common Core standards. Do you have a position on that, sir?
Well, I think it's premature. I think that every time we turn around, the Republicans have created some kind of a boogeyman. The latest one is a Common Core. There was a lot of discussions with educators, legislators, teachers to formulate Common Core. The idea is that if you go to one school, you can transfer over to another, and that there's some common factors that are being instructed in those schools. It's not a perfect piece of legislation, but I don't see any reason at this particular point to look at it before even some of the scoring and some of the judgment and analysis of what Common Core can do for the people is done. I think it's just another issue that's been thrown out there to see if it has some substance to it with the public, and I don't think it does.
Your campaign website talks about the need to maintain a pristine environment. Can you talk about that in light of the two mining debates, the proposal for the Gogebic in Ashland and Iron counties, and the whole controversy over frac sand mining, sir?
Both those issues, I think, come down to issues that need to be addressed both at the local level and the state legislature. Number one, I think local towns and counties are concerned about the need to be able to regulate the fracking industry as it grows, trucking issues, tracking issues, taking the sand out here, high capacity wells. We need to make sure that local counties and towns have some capability to control that. But I think the Gogebic taconite bill that came through is probably one of the more irresponsible votes of my opponent. And in fact, now that we know that $700,000 were gifted in a secret donation to Club for Growth, in which my opponent benefited. At one time, 10 years ago, he called $100,000 going to fight his candidacy sinister money, and yet in the last election, almost $480,000 was spent on him. Irresponsible in regards to how that bill was passed. My opponent sat aside and voted against 18 amendments by the Democrats that could have made that mining bill a better bill in northern Wisconsin and more responsible. It was written by Gogebic taconite. It went through in its purest form. Perhaps the money and $700,000 that went into it explains part of the reasons that the Republicans refused to even consider those 18 amendments, but it's irresponsible because it violates the public trust. It allows the mining company to put waste into streams, into wetlands, and mitigate them elsewhere when there's probably other better projects that would support the industries that people are talking about and creating jobs. I talked to an iron worker not too long ago saying, I'd be happy to help support a reproduction of the Eiffel Tower in Hurley, Wisconsin, that puts all your welders to work, creates employment opportunities by drawing people in northern Wisconsin in the tourism industry, and as people go up there and look at Lake Superior and the Pinokies, say, oh, this is a wonderful, pristine area. Right now we're hosting the Shaquamican Fat Tire Festival in northern Wisconsin, a clean, environmentally compatible type of tourist attraction that's drawing thousands of people, and we need to support those kind of environmentally safe activities over activities that are being proposed by out-of-state large corporations. The billionaires involved in this, whether it's Chris Klein or David or Charles Koch, have billions of dollars behind that. That is an unfair playing field when you look at the impact their money and donations have had in the state of Wisconsin compared to your vote or my mother's vote. I think that's unfair. I think it's unfair to the farmers who are struggling in the state of Wisconsin to get pieces of legislation that address their issues. I think it sets a bad precedent as well.
Let's talk about transportation funding. There are projections that the state transportation budget could be $600 or $700 million out of balance in the next biennial budget, sir. How should that deficit be filled?
Well, it's going to be a difficult decision again, but I think it ought to be a shared burden on those people that use the highways. Unfortunately, we may have to talk about raising, I think, the gasoline tax. With people driving more efficient cars, they're buying less gas. But those people who are using the highways, whether they're truckers, whether they're commuters or whatever, I think have the responsibility. If we want those good roads, we need to be able to fund them. I think one of the bigger problems is that very often the fight is not between Republicans and Democrats in northern Wisconsin. It's between northern Wisconsin and southern Wisconsin. And so reaching across that aisle and working with the legislators in northern Wisconsin to get the proper funding for transportation needs to fix our roads is essential. I think it's more of a battle between the north and the south at times than an ideological kind of battle going on.
Question on health care. As you know, 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care from the Medicaid program. The American Hospital Association says our Medicaid reimbursement rates are second lowest in the nation. Do you think they should be increased, sir?
I think that's something I'm going to have to study. If they're the second lowest in the United States, it's possible that they need to be increased, but I think it would be better if our governor had accepted the federal funds to go into some of these programs, because that money didn't go back into the taxpayers' pockets. It was just simply dispersed to other states, and I think we're going to lose something like $1.8 billion over the next 3 or 4 years in federal aids. Number one, having that money in the state of Wisconsin means that it's going to reduce some of the cost to the state burden of funding Medicaid, and you know, again, even having the own local exchange that was rejected by the governor could have helped people's insurance rates come lower, and whether or not there's an impact on the actual recovery by the hospital association because people have more money to afford better policies, or whether the state of Wisconsin has more money to work with in the Medicaid program, is something that needs to be looked at.
You're a member of the Oneida Nation. Why would that make you a better state senator?
Well, I think it allows me to look at the state in a much diverse way. I'm not only a member of the Oneida Nation, I'm part Scottish, I'm part German, I'm a descendant of the Ojibwe. I appreciate that diversity. I think it allows for someone to be a spokesman there for tribal issues, but tribal issues is not my primary goal in this. It's to speak for the 29th Senate District. If people feel that, well, he's become such a prominent spokesman for tribes in the state of Wisconsin, it's because I've done my job well. But I've chosen to live here rather than to be a lobbyist. I got offered $100,000 to be a lobbyist. I chose to be in northern Wisconsin because I love it and I want to be here with my family, and I want to give that passion that I gave to the tribal community to northern Wisconsin and the citizens of the 29th District as well.
Earlier you mentioned the potential budget deficit. If there is a deficit, how should it be made up, sir?
There's going to have to be some hard budget cuts. There's going to have to be some hard decisions on whether taxes need to be shifted in some way. We need to look at tax formulas. I think we need to look at all the exemptions that have gone into the various factors. I think if we were going to look at any kind of tax reform in the future, it's looking at, we apply a tax and then it seems like we exempt this organization, we exempt this corporation. I think that some of the money can be made up by looking at those exemptions, but there's going to have to be some tough decisions. And I look forward to working with our newest governor, Mary Burke, when I get elected to office as well.
There'll be another bill to legalize medical marijuana. Now, the issue now travels with the experiences of Colorado and the state of Washington, which have legalized recreational marijuana. Your position on those, sir?
I'm ready for a conversation on recreational use, but I think we need to, first of all, legalize medical marijuana. I think we need to make it a medical issue, a doctor's issue, rather than a criminal issue. I think we can enhance the THC oils, which have already been legalized, but the doctors haven't been able to prescribe that yet. I think we need to have a conversation on industrial hemp and what that could do to farmers, but I'd have no problem engaging in a discussion about decriminalizing marijuana and looking at what happened in Colorado and Washington, using those taxpayers' monies that could be generated off of that activity for further law enforcement work on harder drugs and AOD health factors. Let's look at it as a health issue rather than a criminal issue.
It was an issue in the Democratic primary for Attorney General, so it is a live issue. First offense drunken driving, should that be crime, Paul?
I don't believe it should be. I think that we've criminalized way too much. Our criminal justice system is overburdened with cases and people that ought to have a second chance. So at this particular point, I don't believe that we should change the first offense drunk driving. I think we need to put more money into educational and mental health care facilities and treatment.
Okay, and finally, I want to give you a chance to highlight differences between you and your opponent on November 4th.
Well, first of all, I'm not a career politician. I think once in a while we need to retire our career politicians and allow someone else to forge the way. I think what I hear on the campaign trail is that people feel that my opponent has lost his way in the last couple of years. He used to be a union member that voted against unions. He was for accepting Medicaid before he voted not to accept Medicaid. He was against school vouchers before a lot of money was poured into his campaign by private school, for-profit school voucher programs, and he voted for those vouchers. Unlike Republican Senator Dale Schultz, who stood up to his own party and says, I don't like the lack of process, I don't like this process, the opponent, my opponent in the 29th district, I think, didn't stand up for his district or northern Wisconsin. He went with the party mantra at that time, and I think that I can do better than this on the second round.
Thank you. Paul Demain of Hayward is the Democratic candidate in the 29th Senate District. The election is November 4. Paul, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.